Morning, everybody. Appreciate you jumping in and jumping on and your commitment to the Affordable Housing Coalition work. We'll just pick up on our agenda here as we have and walk through it. First top item we have is the continued review on our stakeholder list that we did that we went through in the last meeting. I think we spent a decent time kind of walking through just to pick up there to see if there was anything else we need to look at in that light. Hold a second, let's see. Yeah. Any additional thoughts thus far in terms of folks as we walked away from that of any additional folks to add or key stakeholders? I know one of the things that we were talking through was even around the right people to connect with and talk to. Those that we listed out, that was one of the things that we were going to think a little bit more about on who should be making the ask and the connection with those individuals to get connected with our work. See if I can pull both of these up at the same time. Yeah. Did anybody have additional thoughts on that list and even on the ask? I know one of the pieces we did put out there, and I will say, hadn't had a chance yet to brief Marla on it, but I did have a conversation having to meet with the mayor sometime after our meeting, and just tossed out there the conversation that we had about convening this group and about the mayor playing a role in facilitating that. And he stated that he was more than happy to play whatever role we felt was necessary to help facilitate the move forward.
I think that's really great. I think it would be really good to have him with a number of these different groups that we named. It would be really good to have him out front along with you, Derwin, to get the attention and kind of all these folks toward all these things that we need to get going in the same direction.
Yeah. And I do not believe we had a timeline associated with that action from our last conversation.
No, we didn't. We didn't have one stated.
I'm just wondering in and around that if there is a sense on the city side in terms of any action that this needs to go before or after, just to make sure that this doesn't get ahead or behind something there. But if there's not, maybe there's a good sense for us to start kind of looking at a time frame around that actual action of ask and facilitating the time to start pulling those stakeholders together. I'm not sure, Melon, or if you're aware of any timing or anything on that side that we need to be thoughtful of on this action.
At this time, no timeline had been mentioned to me at this time, but I think that's something that we can, sort of keep in mind as we continue to talk with the people that we're talking to. I don't think we want to have it on their back burner. So as we talk to them, if they could, when you ask if they want to give it to us now, just go ahead on and, have it on their forefront to go ahead on and now, sooner than later.
Yeah, got it. So maybe just to think about that, if there's a, just in terms between our meetings now, if there is an opportunity for us to look at, if we're saying the sooner than later to have the meeting, then this is March going into April. I guess if we can say that we want to plan to have that date or time solidified before our next time coming together, maybe that's a conversation that needs to be had internally around timing, and then facilitating some additional asks. Just wondering if we're at a place now that we can bring these folks in together. If there's something, do we know what we want to say to them? Do we know what we're asking and presenting. And if we say yes to those, then are we ready to set that time, just so that it's not something that we kind of carry over?
Right. So, right, because I don't know how soon Marla is looking at for the group to start going out and ask, or how soon the letters may be going out. Because, for instance, if the committee or the group is looking at going out before, because some budgets are ending by the end of June. So if we are looking out, sending out letters like May, and people are saying, well, our budgets are ending in June, and they want to, give us something before their fiscal year end. And they say, oh yeah, we have, $5,000 that we still have on the table. We want to give it to you. Then we want to take it. But if they say, well, we're going to get in our budget for the ask for the fiscal year July 1 till next year, then we get into those individual budgets. So it just depends on when we are looking at sending out our letters and the ask.
Got it. And I know we did, we were kind of broke up what the ask was with each one of them, whether it was planning or implementation. Yeah, we broke that up, folks. Okay.
Darren, this process, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking about it differently, but I don't know when we'll be at the point of formulating what we're going to ask them for, but that needs to be kind of that needs to be confirmed before we start gathering people or thinking about a time frame and then pushing that time frame onto when we develop what presentation we're going to make and the kind of explicit ask of each one, because I don't know if the ask is going to go, to each one of them individually, or is the ask going to be asking the group that the mayor is presenting to, or, there's a little bit of planning that we got to do from a coalition perspective and putting together the information that the mayor is going to share with this group in order to optimize our time, I think, and optimize their time. That's the other thing. I think their time is going to be pretty critical because a number of them are, trying to decide on when to go back to work and, what to do about offices and just a number of things. And Melon, to your point, I think most of the ones, obviously the municipal ones would have budgets, but most of the ones we talked about have calendar ending budgets and not mid-year budgets.
Yeah, just taking off on what Joe's saying, I think some of these groups, I'm guessing that some of them might be more able to help with the planning process monies, and then some are going to be more interested in maybe participating in the implementation once the plan is there. So we may need to think some about what kind of ask are we sending to what kind of group. And then the other thing I'm wondering is, when we're making an ask, should we have some idea of how much the city is willing to commit? Because when we're asking these folks, are they going to help? I wonder if it would be helpful to say the city has already committed X to this planning effort, or X to this implementation effort, or whatever. So I think that, plus kind of giving them an idea of what it is we're trying to accomplish here. What kind of housing are we trying to produce? What kind of plan are we trying to produce, and all that. So I think they're going to want to know a little bit more what we're up to, and along with where's the city on this, and what are we specifically asking you for?
Yeah, and to that end, Melon, do you know the timing of when the council is going to make their recommendation? I know that there's been a specific talk on the 20 million that they plan to set aside for affordable housing. Do you know if there's a timeline on official action for the council to adopt that?
No, I don't have that information. But I know that on the spreadsheet that Marlo sent out to the group, that funders list, the Excel sheet, as she indicated on that, for the potential funders, it indicate what resource type that for the ask. If it's short term, if it's bond money, if it's operational support. For each one of them, she's kind of listed the type of ask that we would be asking from those funders. So that sort of give you an idea of the type of money or support that we would be asking from them as you all go to them. And I think that's probably what you all may have submitted to her when you were indicating going to the funders.
Yeah, it was.
Melon, I have a question. If the city's dollars that may go towards affordable housing, if there are other groups who are trying to address this issue and are trying to raise dollars as well, will the city's dollars go in with them? Will the city collaborate with other entities, or will the city stand alone?
That would be a council decision. I don't know. I don't see where it would be something that would be beneficial where we wouldn't be working as a collaborative effort, but I wouldn't know.
Can you say more about, Paul? Are you talking about like entities that, like groups that are trying to raise money, or like actual developers that are trying to raise money for projects, or both?
Well, both, but particularly entities, organizations, or associations that are trying to address this issue around affordable housing and the funds that's needed in order to produce affordable housing. So it could be both.
Yeah, I will say, and John probably has a little more, it's direct experience in the area, but I would say that the level of affordable housing that needs to be created can't be done without government support. And I think that's hands down, period. So you're going to have some kind of cross collaboration there. And I think
I would hope so.
And usually, Paula, when agencies or developers are doing those type projects, they tend to reach out to the city for some type of gap financing. But if they start those projects before they start the projects, if they start prior to coming to the city and dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and finding out the steps, they can't get our money once they started moving dirt, because they have to do environmental reviews and different things. We have a toolbox kit and information on our website that tells them what they need to do prior to getting their project started.
That's good information to know. Thank you.
A quick question, and my apologies because I missed the last meeting. Did you guys talk at all about trying to go after any state funding for say non-recurring funds for, say, planning or implementation?
We did not, but I will say that the city was included in a special appropriation from last year. And it was $10 million that came to the city for affordable housing as a one-time direct dollar amount. But Melon, I don't know if you all have another ask for any additional resources there, but I know that was one that did come that was appropriated to the city for last year. And I think that, I'm not sure if that's a part of the 20 million that has been tossed around or not, or if that's in addition to that.
Okay.
It would be good to add the state to the list, though.
Yeah, my thinking is that if we position this as kind of a pilot program, I mean, this is, as far as I know, isn't this going to be unique to North Carolina, this type of affordable housing program? And I think it wouldn't be out of bounds to go to the state, especially with the long session coming up. They'll be working on the budget for next year, starting at the end of this year. After the short session's over, we get through the election. It might be an opportunity to go for some significant planning funds, especially if we position it as something that could be replicated in other cities or used as a basis for other cities.
I agree. I think that's probably make sure we add that to our advocacy piece to add to for the city. And Mel, I don't. Has the city already done there? I guess they probably would if they would have done that already. They've already adopted like the advocacy, kind of their legislative agenda items.
I don't know. I think they're working on it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was saying that would be a good one in terms of being able to recommend that they add something like that to their legislative agenda.
Yeah, the issue for this session is that it's going to be very, very short, and and they've already, the budget, the budget's pretty much set. So they would have to find money somewhere. But going into if we're ready for the long session next year, and that might work well with if we have already, I guess the good part about that timing too is if we've already secured some private dollars, it could be positioned as this would be matched by private dollars. We're not just asking the state to carry all the weight.
Mm-hmm. So Darren, a question again about the 20 million. I've heard, people say that the 20 million is just a drop in the bucket. What do we know what the bucket is?
Well, I don't. Yeah. I would say I think in terms of if we look at the big number of those units, we're talking about 15,000 units, so that need to be done. You're talking about probably billions in terms of what it's going to cost to actually totally build out that number. That's why I think that the comprehensive nature of what we would work towards is important to look at. And when we come down to even the conversation and framework, I think that's probably a piece we need to work on fine tuning, because if we go to folks and ask about resources, I'm sure that's probably going to be a question they ask. Okay, what is this universe we're talking about to actually make an impact? And how are these resources going to be leveraged to actually make a dent in the big picture issue? And
in our planning, will we determine that amount?
And this is, I guess, for the group, I think for as a whole, when we get to the big piece on the actual housing plan, I think the housing plan itself, if it's going to actually be impactful, it has to identify kind of what we would see as that big number. That I think that would necessitate being included as a part of that full-fledged housing plan.
I would agree with that too, Derwin. I would think that if we're going to do a plan, it needs to be a comprehensive plan that kind of lays it out, and not just immediate, but for future, because obviously this bogey is not going, or this bucket is not going to be done in 2 or 3 years kind of thing. So this has to be a long-term, and I think, Andrew Nika even talked about how this plan needs to be a livable, flexible plan, as a matter of fact, but it needs to have some pretty stern guardrails as to what we're trying to do, and have some milestones that we accomplish. Because, when you think of 15 to 16,000 units as a total need, you just can't think about that when you really, and again, the plan could address this, when you really need to think about, maybe from a demographic standpoint, which level of housing do we need first? We might need 500 units of this level of housing, or 800 units of that level of housing kind of, and that's still quite a bit of housing to do in a 2 or 3 year period of time kind of thing. So I don't want to try to bite the whole apple at one time, and hopefully the planning will help justify that thinking, if you would.
Yeah, and to add there, and I think this is a piece for us to understand our role and capacity in conjunction with city staff there, because when I did talk to the mayor just on conversations right after they'd had their briefing by staff, and they had all the folks that came in, that was very, very great conversation they had there. And at the end of that, the mayor did speak about, the commitment that the city was going to look to make. There was conversation about a bond referendum that would increase more. There would be more than just the 20 million, whatever they would do, a bond referendum potentially for housing. We'll also ask staff to come back to around a plan for annual, development goal that's there, and how that will happen. As I understand it, there potentially would be, we have X number of dollars, then there's some RFP that's put out to help facilitate the development of those numbers, I guess, with whatever collaboration is out there. But I'm not sure where staff, I don't know, Melanie, if you all are in the process of talking through that internally on that request around, that was made at the committee level, or if you all have a place of ready to talk about that or not.
I'm on mute. I'm not sure we're quite ready to talk about that now, but we are moving forward with some things and are excited about bringing some things forward, but not quite ready to release it at this moment. But we're ready. We're getting there. I want to let Marla bring those things forward. She would have been here today, but there were some things that were that she has to do this morning. But yeah.
Yeah. So that's something I think. Go ahead, Paul.
Just one quick question, Darren. The bond referendum that you just mentioned, that would not just be for new build construction, right? It'll also be for rehab.
I think that's yet to be determined, and I think as the Affordable Housing Coalition, I would hope we'd be able to share some voice in, you know, some of those buckets on how for them to use it. But I think I think, at least from what I hear, is high level conversations. But rehab is a part of what's on the list in terms of that has to be a part of kind of the work of going in and rehabbing. That's been one of the key items that's something that we need to do. So I'm only assuming that would be a part, but none of that has been decided, as I understand.
I think it would be new construction and rehabbing of existing buildings to conform to reuse of buildings back into housing.
Yeah.
So yes, a combination of both.
Okay.
So with that, just looking at where we are, just as we have this conversation, it does seem that there are additional pieces that we want to kind of fine tune in reference to having that conversation. We threw some of those out there. So I think it would be healthy for us to be able to identify and be very, you know, to be specific in terms of what we think we want to talk about, and then understand what information do we have and not have in that area in terms of with the stakeholders. And that kind of gives us the homework that needs to happen in terms of fine tuning what's going to happen in that space with the stakeholders themselves. Unless someone has something to add specifically around that stakeholder component, I do want to move to a piece that we didn't get into deeply in the last conversation, but we did talk around it. And it's the piece around the potential lead agencies, strengths and weaknesses of agencies that are identified, what needs and expectations from lead agency that's there. And if you see on the document there, these are just the ones that have been tossed out. That there's United Way, Winston-Salem Foundation, Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods, and SG Atkins CDC were ones that were put out there either by the coalition members or staff that may have kind of put those out there as potential lead organizations. So I do want us to take the time kind of to walk through just any of our thoughts there on the potential for those lead organizations, as we talked before, that maybe it's something that may start with one of these folks and then ends up something different, or whether it is capacity that they have there. But would like for us to kind of maybe start looking through that, and, you know, looking, first one on there is United Way. And so just people thoughts that folks have around the strengths and weaknesses around the organizations there, and potential partnership from a lead standpoint. And again, none of these I don't believe anybody in these organizations have actually been contacted about their desire to actually lead the work. So that's also a good caveat.
But Darren, to that point, before we start talking about their strengths and weaknesses, can you enlighten me as to what the lead agency's role will be?
As I understand it essentially, in terms of, we talk about the work, the holding this work, you know, we talked about the kind of, if we were to go through, and even with the development of a plan, if one of the goals we had was to establish and set up something that was similar to the model that was in New Orleans, that needed to be something separate and apart from the city. So the conversation was who could do that, who could lead that work, where could that kind of work stand if it was separate and apart from the city. And I think these organizations were then identified as potential places to have that work to start or to live in, was my understanding from potential lead organizations.
Okay. I guess I'm thinking with some of the names on the list, you know, I can't speak for United Way, but for Winston-Salem Foundation, since I am on that board, I'm wondering what that means as far as staff time for any of these agencies. You know, are we expecting them to hire staff in order to, because this won't be an initiative that you can just pay part-time attention to, I wouldn't think. Or will the city or us be hiring? I don't know where the action takes place, I guess is what I'm trying to get to.
Joe, I'll tell you the way I'm thinking about it is similar to some of the stuff that I've been working on in Guilford County, where the community foundation there takes the lead and they hire staff dedicated to the project. And there are admin dollars as part of the allocation, wherever it comes in, and it's specified. So I would envision that they would need to hire if they take the lead.
Think. Okay. And okay. All right. I just needed to make sure I understood what that responsibility was going to be for that particular agency.
Yeah. Agreed. And
Darren, there's a group the group that's been convening around affordable housing, folks for good housing. Would that be a group that could also be on the list? Just curious.
Yeah, I think at this point, I think it's wide open right now around, you know, who that and where that can look like. And I think that's part of the conversation to have in terms of what is it that we would like to see in that group? What do you think needs to be in that group or individuals, you know, and then even capacity around what's there in terms of not necessarily just on the human capacity in terms of staff, because if you were going to have them as a partner, then like was mentioned, you want to make sure you had admin and other resources going there. But I'd say just around the capacity to be able to even just to hold that work itself, I think is a question.
But I'd like to suggest that we add their names as a potential organization.
Okay.
What's the name again, Paula?
Folks for Good Housing.
Okay.
Yeah, and then just from there, want to maybe from here we can just kind of maybe walk through them. If not sure if folks feel comfortable to do that at this point, just in terms of where, but I think it's help us as we kind of shift through and kind of see where we want to go with it. But
well, let me just say for United Way again, I'm sure everybody else knows this because Cindy has been sending out newsletters. But you know they're going to have a change of leadership. I don't know how their board feels about, you know, taking on something this significant with transition and leadership about to happen, but they may. Again, I can't speak on their behalf, but Cindy will be retiring at the end of this year from what I understand.
Yeah. So that's something to consider. I know they do have their the housing matters area in terms of the work that's there, that's led. I will say, you know, and I've shared this with Cindy and others. Just I've had some concern. It's just in terms of some of the managed programs like they have out there and kind of the accountability components. I think that those things have to be very clear on how you structure and set up those things. And that's regardless of if it's United or anyone, you know, being intentional on how do you frame and set up that partnership or organization that may be programming or individual work there. I think is an important piece to be clear. What is our expectation of the organization and what are they going to do? And then how do we have an accountability factor for outcomes associated with that?
And Darren, just to, you know, I know a little bit about what United Way is doing around housing, and I think that they'll be producing a white paper or some research that they're doing on housing right now.
Yeah.
Well, and my question about them was, would the nature of how they work, would that be more suited to helping in the short term to create a plan versus investing as a housing developer? I mean, I think they mostly support things on an annual basis, right?
Yeah, as a funder, yeah. So it's something for us to think through there, and even I think the biggest piece though is even the interest and capacity in terms of as you have changing leadership, other folks that come in and may have a different direction or thought on that, but it's worth the conversation. I think in any of these folks here as we go through it, regardless of if they actually end up being the lead organization, if they're named here, they probably have some value in being a part of overarching group itself in some form or fashion. Any thoughts on the United Way side there to share?
And I know United Way, they're studying this issue to see how they might invest in it.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. The next one there, Winston-Salem Foundation. We got 2 board members on Winston-Salem Foundation on call. But thoughts from Winston-Salem Foundation, at least from my perspective, I've normally kind of seen Winston-Salem Foundation more as a funding space and not necessarily the host of this kind of work. But I'm not sure if there's any different thoughts that's there.
This would be
I think for the Winston-Salem Foundation, I think it'll be a matter of, as Joe said, staffing and, whether this is one of their focus areas,
right,
or whether it becomes one of their focus areas.
And this would be a different role for them of anything else that I recall, even in the project impact work around education. They are the lead agency for that, but the school system pretty much leads that effort. And they are just the depository for the contributions that were made to the project impact initiative, if you would. But they weren't the ones going out doing the daily work as far as monitoring and that kind of thing, and producing reports regarding progress and status things. So again, that's why I was curious about the role. And John, I'd be more interested in what Walker Sanders over in Greensboro is doing when they're taking on projects like this. And you say they counted as part of administration. Does that mean that the city of Greensboro or whoever's the partner in those developments, are they funding that work and then funding it through the Greater Greensboro Foundation, or how does that work from a fiscal standpoint?
Well, the one organization or the one of their activities I've been involved with, two I've been involved with over there. One was their Housing Our Community initiative that was kind of a public-private thing, and they took the lead on it. This is about 5-6 years ago, and that was more of a kind of what we're doing here, the planning phase and convening and all that. There weren't a whole lot of dollars attached to it at that time. The second one is the Eastern Triad Workforce Initiative, which is that they act as the fiscal agent. So there are public dollars that come in,
Right.
Some private, but it's mostly public dollars that come in. And then they're responsible for the reporting back and convening the stakeholders. And, so that's kind of the model I had more in my mind.
Right.
And I think that as we're talking about these groups, I mean, that you really have multiple functions here. And,
yeah,
if they're just a fiscal agent, then somebody like the foundation's a natural fit, I would think. But when you're talking about running a program and convening a lot of different stakeholders, that's almost like a standalone entity. So you could have 2 entities. You could have a fiscal agent, and then you could have a group that's managing the actual work. So, that's another approach we could look at too, is a partnership between organizations.
Right. Well, that was why I asked the question I did to begin with, as far as the role of whoever the lead agency might be.
Yeah.
And does that agency, in this case, John, would, if we're going to hire this consultant, and I'm assuming that would be a decision that we would make or recommend. I don't know if we make that decision or recommend it to the city. I don't know how that goes from a protocol standpoint, but at any rate, when this consultant comes on to start producing the plan, who manages that consultant? Is it the coalition? Is it the lead agency that's taken over? How does that work?
Good question.
I mean, clear lines of reporting and responsibility is important in this, as a matter of fact.
They are.
You don't be stepping over one another.
Yeah.
And Mel, I don't know if the city has a thought on that just yet, but I just envisioning I think Marlon may have mentioned early on in some of the conversation that, the city starting in that position, kind of, holding that role as the work starts, and potentially that shifting in time. But I also know in terms of when they fund certain roles and positions, there's some accountability that goes back as well. But I had the similar thought that you all were just talking through in terms of the partnerships, in terms of, is there a physical agent and then, that managing of the work, especially if we're going after the larger kind of corporate dollars to kind of get put into someplace. I am unsure, or historically, I've seen the city want to take that kind of responsibility in terms of receiving those funds from outside groups and then kind of holding and stewarding those. And so I think that probably is a good place to look at, United Way, Winston-Salem Foundation as some kind of real significant role in that area. I think makes a lot of sense. And then pairing that with the potential program partner that's managing that individual work on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think when you think about the reporting requirements, when you do this kind of work on the financial side, I think that's intimidating for a lot of organizations, especially small organizations. So if you can take that piece off of their plate and then allow them to focus on the work on the development side, on the housing work and the community side, then I think you open the field up for a few more partners. Then, I can imagine, especially a small organization, all of a sudden they have all this, all these really, really technical fiscal requirements. That's tough. That's a tough ask.
Yeah, and that was the follow-up to that too, in terms of even what resources are coming in, because especially if you have federal dollars that are coming through in that space, even looking at the list here, that folks who have had, I think that's probably something if we're putting a short list, folks who have that experience, because like you mentioned, that reporting process, understanding how that works, and being able to properly respond in that space. Because I know from a programming standpoint, I know United Way deals with federal resources that comes there, particularly on the housing side. I know SG Atkins is managing that space as well. Just from a programming standpoint, but to that end, I think that's a clear piece and of importance on that financial side. Other thoughts there as we're looking at just Winston-Salem Foundation. Are there thoughts in terms of who and what we need in that the capacity of a group and lead? They have Neighbors Better Neighborhood there. Thoughts there on their role that they could play or leading the work. As we've talked through this, as I mentioned before, maybe if it's them not as a lead organization in any of these organizations that I think they could play a role, like a Neighbors Better Neighborhood, I think there's an engagement component that community engagement role that I think they could play. Not necessarily actually holding the work and leading the work, but help them facilitate the engagement with community around the work, I think is likely a proper role to look at them for.
I think I would concur with that, Derwin. I think that's a better concept and role for, NBN than actually leading the work. I think community engagement is what they do real well.
I agree with that. Absolutely. They would be an essential partner, I think, but taking the lead, I'm not sure if that's in their bailiwick.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Then moving down to SG Atkins CDC, thoughts on SG Atkins?
Well, I certainly think that our Carol can, again, it would depend on the model John and I have been referring to, but I certainly think Carol Davis could manage the project, manage the work if she's got the right staffing. So again, this is going to be one that does she hire that staffing? Do we hire that? But she won't be able to lead this work on her own with the work that she's doing with SG Atkins CDC. I wouldn't think. I'm not going to speak for her, but I would think that she would be able to manage, given whatever the parameters that are given her, with the right capacity to do the work, she could manage that work to that level, I would think. But as far as leading it herself, again, it gets into the definition of lead agency. Just my thought.
I agree with Joe on that. I think as it relates to capacity, for any organization, it'll be a matter of capacity. But I think that SGAC has been in this sector for a while, and probably have a lot of lessons that they've learned. And I think they would, or any CDC would that's been developing housing would do well.
Yeah. I agree with you as well, Joe, on that. I think that's part of the thing that we probably want to define very, very much upfront for any group. What is this? What is you're being asked to do this or help this, and this is what's coming to help you do it. It should be clear up front to any of those groups. And I'll say that again to the fact that the work SGAC has done, I think, has been great in the housing space. I think what this would do is it would elevate the work. They've been kind of concentrated on the defined area that the focus is. This would be kind of an amplification of that, being beyond their defined area that they have been working to look to be more of a citywide work. That's the difference, I think, in compared to the current work.
That is true. That's a good recognition of that geography. But that, as we all know, that's one of the common characteristics of a CDC.
Yeah.
Unless you organize for, total city or total county work, that's kind of comes with the territory.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think it can position them to do real and genuine collaboration with other CDCs who might be in the space, or other organizations who might be in the space.
Yeah. And to the end, we talked about even partner with the fiscal agent. They still have that direct knowledge and understanding of managing and use of those larger federal resources and others that come with that reporting piece. So that's another component there too. And Paula, you'd mentioned folks for good housing, and maybe just for the folks who are on, maybe just to share, talk to just kind of that work, what that group is doing for us to be able to maybe talk through that role.
Yeah, well, that's a group that has been meeting for several years now around this issue of housing, around this crisis, and they're comprised of developers and professionals and advocates in housing. So I just raised them up as an organization that has a lot of expertise at the table.
And Paula, I'm not familiar with them. I guess I've been out of the game for a few years, but are they a 501c3 operating locally here in Forsyth County, or what are they? Not
yet. They have just been operating as a loose organization. So I don't think they have taken on any official structure, but certainly, that's a minor thing, I believe.
Right. Okay. All right. I wasn't sure.
And Paula, if I were to categorize kind of some of the people at the table there, would you say that's more advocacy and developer, folks who are advocates in the area and folks who develop the housing, that's kind of the makeup of that?
Yeah. You have developers, builders at the table, advocates. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Because I just think that's important, just as we think about it, even if, certain groups, like I said, are not ones that go to lead it, what role can we make sure as you're saying, as we coalesce around this, how do we pull those folks in to participate in some form in the work as well? So understanding who's at that table is important as well. So,
okay. Hey, Derwin, I'd also like to add that participating in some of those meetings over the last couple of years, there is a wide array of people, as Paula said, but they've actually had some community members attend some of those meetings as well to offer some insight as to what they've been thinking about. So it's been pretty refreshing just to get some different perspectives and points of view as well. So I think they're definitely a group that would be worthy of sitting down and talking to and getting some new, fresh ideas about some housing ideas and stocks.
Excuse me, this is Melvin. Paul, I'm trying to take some notes. So is this the folks for good housing that doesn't have that 501c3, but they are a group of people that we're talking about right now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And George Red, congratulations.
Yes, congratulations.
George, congratulations.
We still have a phone call to make to each other, George. I haven't forgotten.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
All right. But Paula, who's the lead? Who's the chair of this group? Do they have a chair? Do they kind of operate by committee or what?
Yeah, Richard Angino, he has been leading this group for the last couple of years. So, but he has been very good at bringing people to the table. It's been a really robust conversation that we've had over these 2 years, including organizations like the hospitals, universities that's been at the table.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
And one thing there, I'll say, and I don't know Paula because that hasn't been as me. I've talked to him plenty of times about some of the work that they've been looking at and talking through, and I know a lot of his work and kind of passion came around kind of some frustration around kind of the city's processes on that, and I think that it's important even to evaluate kind of what the city's doing now in those areas and programs and questions around, and that may be something from an agenda item we might want to have and even engage additional folks on, because we talk about a work housing plan, a component there that looks at the accessibility of the existing programs. The city has the programs and resources that are there, but if they're not connecting with the development community, if they're not incenting that work, then how, outside of name only, what are these programs doing? What are these the tools in the toolbox being used for? And I know that he has shared and has tossed different thoughts around things out there too. So that's another area I know they have that conversations have come up just around, if these programs exist, then why aren't they being used a little bit more robustly than they are if they're being impactful?
Yeah.
Okay. So those are the agencies and organizations that have been thrown out there. There are other ones that you think we want to, just kind of talk through or even evaluate around that space. And then there was also just the thought of, if we did feel there was one out there, then that may mean a totally new entity or organization or something that stood up to take on the work as a whole. I will just say, just on that thought, I think that concept has pros and cons to it, just in the sense, there's no baggage that comes along with the organization or group, but then sometimes depending on where that's housed, I think the runway to start and moving can also be a lot longer in terms of if you're just looking to stand something up totally new. We're talking about wanting how we move quickly and swiftly in the process, that, there are pros and cons on that, but I'll just toss it back to the group just some thoughts on if it was just a totally new group, not connected to any established group.
So Darren, in terms of new groups, will we, the city, put out an RFP in order to invite other groups?
Melon, I guess I'm unsure. I think maybe that's I guess we probably influenced that process here. But I think, I'm not sure staff, if there's money and resources, how that, there probably wouldn't have to be a RFP if there's going to be significant resources, but I'm not sure, Melon.
I don't think we'll do an RFP to invite other groups. I think we'll continue to, do this list at this point. But if an organization is going to be selected as a lead, there will probably be some type of RFP of some sort. But more conversation will be discussed on how that will be done.
Okay.
I think one of the advantages of creating a new organization would be that it would have a very specific mission that can be crafted from the very beginning to address the issues. Essentially you're not trying to shoehorn something into another organization's operation. You're creating it from there's more work, and there's at the beginning. But I'm also thinking from a fundraising side, having a specific organization where it's very clear what it's going to. There's no confusion over what the money is for, where it's going, what it's going to be used for. Again, a challenge would be, I think a challenge from the fundraising side is making sure everybody's confident that the organization is viable. But if it's being stood up by a public-private partnership, and it has the support of all the groups that we're talking about here, and its mission is to engage those groups in the capacities that they are best able to help. I just think I'm sure there's some disadvantages, but from my mind, the main advantage is it gets to be crafted specifically for what we're trying to do here. I
like that thinking too, John. I agree with that. If it can happen.
Yes, and that's kind of how Housing New Orleans was done, right? That was a new organization created specifically for that purpose.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
But in terms of a scope of work, would that scope of work come from us, from the city, or from the group that's vying for that role?
Yeah.
I would say it would
come from the group. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Darren. Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. I would say I think I would say I see a collaborative action in terms of framing that, because I think if we're where we talked about, from the group and then from community and setting and framing, if we're using that Housing New Orleans model, they had that city impetus on starting, but they got a lot of community voice and other voices that helped to set, that framework for where they were going to go.
Yeah, practically speaking, the way I think it would probably go is there'd be a lot, and this is the hard work at the beginning, is there'd be a lot of discussion about who's going to be on the board, who is going to direct, who, how is that allocated? Which groups get to contribute to the board? How many community members are going to be in the board versus how many, is it going to be a representative board where each organization that's involved gets to send X number of board members? That would all have to be discussed and worked out. And then that group would then kind of take on the role of directing how everything goes from that point on. So the real, you talk about a lot of upfront work, getting that comprised and negotiated and getting everybody seated. Then that group would take on the work of directing the actual work, I guess is the best way to put it.
And to me, John, that sounds sort of like collective impact, I guess is the best word that I can think of, that where there are a number of organizations at the table working towards this issue, but each one of them might end up with a role, like we mentioned NBN as an organization that might be doing the community engagement or something like that. But there may be other organizations that have specific roles that they can do alone. But anyway.
Or they can be engaged by this new organization, right? And that board would make those determinations. And, that's why all that upfront work, it's hard. And I'm sure the people who are going to be doing it are going to wish that they were doing something else after a while, but then they get it. But once they get it formed, then that's where you've gotten the community input up front. And they have a clear charter and a clear direction. And then then I think that's when things really speed up, because then they get really serious about collecting funds, about getting projects out of the ground and doing the work that has to be done using, like you said, the collective impact of the various contributing organizations and stakeholders.
And John, I know you been at the table of work there in Greensboro, just on things that they've shifted, the continuum of care and all that kind of stuff. And in my mind, that's the mod. Some of the model, like from a board standpoint, I'm thinking about is how some continuum of care are set up in the sense of you have a smaller kind of continuum group that is there, that is doing a lot of the governance work. But then here we also have kind of the larger kind of housing caucus group that is a part of the continuum of care. But this is a huge community, folks. So you may have 40, 50 people who are part of that group. They make recommendations that end up in front of that governing group, but they're not necessarily a part of it. So they're still included, in that, but they're not, the governing group of it, so that there's still that connecting. Because I'm just thinking of, there's so many groups that you want to make sure that that the work is aligning and that people are being aligned in it. But then everybody can't be on everybody can't be on the governing board, but there should be a space where folks can be heard. Is that some of the things that you all looked at through that process there?
Oh man, I won't go deep into the COC thing in Gopher County, because that got weird and got really contentious for a while. But the result was, after, and I won't tell you, I won't get into the weeds why it all happened, but yeah, that's exactly what happened. And each of the members of the COC had a vote, but there's an organizing board, or I guess a board of directors, best way to put it, that makes all the final decisions. But it is informed by the overall, it's brought to the overall membership, and they definitely have a say. And once you get everybody pointed in the right direction and on the same page, it's very, very powerful. But it almost broke apart for a little while, and then they were able to pull it together. And that's kind of what's informing my comments about that upfront work, because it's really important to have those discussions first and get all this stuff aired out. Not everybody's always going to be happy, but you, especially if they have a say in who that leadership is, because the board comes from the COC membership. So they're voting about who's going to represent them. And I think that's they at least have a say. So even if they don't agree with every decision, they're at least in the discussion, and in general, everybody's on the same page. So yeah, that's kind of where the inspiration for that idea came from.
Got it. Okay. All right.
Sorry, but I have to leave for an appointment, but this discussion's been really helpful, I think, in defining things a lot better. So.
Good.
Take care, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
See you next time.
All right. So moving down, we talked about who will contact those identified and seek engagement. I guess based on what I'm hearing, I'm not certain that we're at the place where we're ready to make any direct contact with any of the groups, or in either category, whether it be lead or the folks in terms of the stakeholder conversations. There's some more pieces to the puzzle, I think, that we have that we want to understand. On the lead organization piece, we want to get better clarity on what resources will be brought to bear for that group that will be doing the lead work, and that will better help in terms of I think in a conversation. And so I think for us to, if we can get that information, then I think it'd be pretty good for us to even have a follow-up conversation here on which one of these directions we want to take. That we think there's an identified group here that should do the work, or are we looking at that new group? And I think we've had good conversation on both ends, but moving that to an action place on which direction we feel like we want to go in on that to make that decision. And then on the stakeholders component, there were questions that we want to get defined information around, exactly, the things that we're asking them for, but then also in terms of that resource, in terms of specifics on what the city has and city's willing to put in, so that can be a number that's given and talked to or talked from with the group as a whole, that's there, and then understanding what that request is that we have for them. Is there other specifics that we wanted to have some more defined information on that before we move to the next? Okay. All right. The next piece here was action steps and plan in terms of what groundwork can we be doing in terms of pending the formal start of the housing plan development process, and how we coordinate. No, we did have this, and we had brief conversation in the last meeting just in and around this area, but toss that back out to folks just from a conversation place on additional groundwork we feel we can be doing before the pending. I think part of that is what we just talked about on some of those key issues we need to define, but additional information or action.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but it feels like we're on the cusp of doing a lot of work, and so I don't know how to define that, but
Yeah.
And we're getting ready to start doing our small groups again, right? So, I think we might want to look at how we organize our small groups, and what each of them is going to do with this.
Yeah, I know that was one piece that was brought up before in terms of that small group and how this work, as we're moving through it, gets filtered into those existing small groups and then any other standing we wanted to create. So I think that is a specific piece there for us as we move.
Can you say a little bit more about small groups?
Our committees, originally we had the different committees we've been meeting in before COVID, and then as COVID came in, we kind of just dropped those and we're meeting more as the whole group. And so then getting back to doing that individual work as we're getting more action pieces here and things that need to be talked through, that, some of that's kind of committee work that probably we can work through as we're moving forward to have that defined areas and have those defined in those specific areas.
Okay. But will those small groups be organized under the same purposes and same names, or do they need to be reformatted depending on what either the housing, if you don't want to wait on the housing plan, I guess, but I'm just wondering about, do they need to be the same ones that we had before? I guess that's the question.
One of the things that came back from that, because I think we asked the question before, is that we have to have those. There's nothing that stops us from having additional kind of subcommittees, but the committees as they are were part of the charter and creation of the group. And so we had to have those committees, but as I understood, there was nothing that stopped us from having, additional groups committee or further defining additional work there.
Okay, I had forgotten about that. I didn't know that was those actual committees were stated in the charter kind of thing. So, okay, no flexibility there then.
And Darren, my question about the small groups is that should they be a little more inclusive in terms of enlarging them a little bit to include other community stakeholders?
And I think that was the point that was brought up as well. Like, they wouldn't be able to be added, quote unquote, to the coalition, but there's nothing that stops us from inviting people to the meetings.
To the small groups.
Yeah, there's nothing that stops us from inviting people there, but because the council appoints the actual members of the coalition, there wouldn't necessarily be formal members, but there's nothing that doesn't allow them to participate in the committee conversations.
Yeah.
And Derwin, is there anybody that we can, I know, how many people have left since we started? I know Tom left. Have we had more than maybe 2 people, 3? So will we need to try and replace some members with some more people right now? Is this the wrong time to ask that? I mean, because if we're going to start those small groups, I think we need to have at least 2 to 3 people per group, so no one person is taking on too much.
Yeah, agreed. And Melon, I know that comes up through the council, and I know even the council passed different committees and boards and commissions, have listed recommendations that come from those committee and coalitions on new members. But I think that if we have thoughts and names of folks that we think could fill those vacancies, some of those are predefined seats. So there may be a seat that says community member or a seat that says developer, those kind of things. So in some of those categories, it's specific on kind of the type of person we want or that's supposed to sit in that role. But Melon, I'm not sure in terms of if there's a thought and people have thoughts on who that could be, but they could send that to Marla or you in terms of recommendations on folks to start that filtering process with the mayor's office.
We will look at that. We'll go back and look at the list and look at the terms and see who needs to be replaced in that position, and get back with the mayor's office and city council. Yes.
Let me just say that I've sent Mark Shelburne, used to work for North Carolina Housing Finance and Development. He has a wealth of knowledge, then went to run the Georgia, I think it's DCA, they call it there. and now works for Novocratic. He is like the most incredible resource. I really highly recommend him. He's now a resident of Winston-Salem. But I've sent the resume. You can look him up. He knows about everything there is to know about housing.
Lisa, I didn't. When did he move to Winston? I didn't know Mark was in Winston.
He moved to Winston, I want to say like a year and a half ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's just he's a super nice guy.
Right. Yeah, I've known Mark a while. Actually, when I was before I was even on the North Carolina Affordable Housing Agency, no, Housing Finance Agency, excuse me, the Housing Finance Agency. I knew Mark before then. So you're right. He's a wealth of knowledge from a housing perspective, all over North Carolina, not just locally, but all over North Carolina and Southeast.
What's the name again, please?
His name is Mark Shelburne.
I think it's Shelbourne. I think
that's correct.
Shelbourne.
Yep, I think that's right.
And you said you sent the resume to Marla or to me? Or?
I sent it to Marla. I've sent it to the mayor. And I just as a little very quick side, I was gonna, talk to the mayor about it, but I've been in the process of selling my property management company. So I've not been a very effective member. I've just sold the property management company and now I'm working on selling some of my properties. I still have a development company that is very, very active, but I've just been like drinking water out of a fire hydrant. And I thought it was going to last for like 6 months, but we're over 2 years now. So I just sold the property management company last week. So I'm hoping that I can participate and be a part of this more, but I've never done this before. So I've been on a pretty strong learning curve. And, we've got a little bit more work to complete, but all along I've said, if we could get Mark Shelburne on this board, he would just, I think he would just put the power pack on it. I mean, he knows how to cut through. He knows about every agency, every program. I actually mentioned to him if he had an interest. This was probably about a year ago. And he said, Lisa, I appreciate that. That would be very interesting.
Oh, could you please just forward that to me, please?
Of course I can.
Thank you.
Do you know him, John? Do you know him?
I don't. I was just trying to look him up, actually.
Yeah, he used to do, I think he worked for, I don't know if it was Martin Eakes at one time in the Triangle area at Self Help, or he did something in the finance side with an agency or two down in the Raleigh-Durham area, and I can't remember all of those affiliates, but Mark's been around a long time.
Let's see here.
Sounds like it'd be a great addition.
Yeah, he would. He really would.
He's working for
one of those that talk about running something. I mean, from a management perspective, that's not a bad name to think about as well because of his experience.
I totally agree. But now he's working for Novocratic. So I mean, he is the guy you go to for knowing how all this stuff works. It's Shelburne.
Okay, BU, the O's out of it. Okay. What is Novocratic? I don't know what that organization is.
Novocratic is pretty much the top. It basically is the affordable housing consultant. It's the big boys that you go to when you don't know, if you're doing a complicated deal. They do training.
Okay. So it's a national agency?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I hadn't heard of them. Sorry.
No, it's okay. He's a housing consultant for them. On his thing and on the Novocratic, it says he's based in Raleigh, but I know he was living here in Winston-Salem. So I just thought this would be a wonderful add to this committee because he's just a wealth of information.
Yeah, I was just looking at reading it. I pulled them up here as well, just reading his bio and stuff there. And so I think you're right. And I think it's maybe a a multifold ask there in terms of if he, just not able to do the full commitment of service on the board. If there's a way to engage him or the city to engage, because I think that's the innovation on behalf of the city in how it engages. I think it's something that's needed. So someone can come and share with staff and other council as well in terms of ways that they've been able to see a lot of stuff happen from the financial side and moving those pieces, which it looks like he has a lot of experience in moving around. That probably be highly beneficial to the group and to the city as a whole there. So yeah, appreciate bringing that. And if others have thoughts, I think send those things over to Mellon and Marla around folks. They can work to facilitate and look at that, because I believe there's some residence restriction on some of the appointment stuff, but it may or may not be. I don't remember that component. And there was also a piece there, and I'm uncertain, even around like the community member in person component was another piece that was there. And I'm not sure in terms of making sure we have someone that's representative of community as we think about just the work moving forward on board. Cool.
And I'm happy to call him. You all just tell me what you want me to do.
Okay. All right. Moving along down here, there's this piece here, and I don't know if anyone had an opportunity to review just some of the conversation in the article there on the shared equity model, the shared equity ownership models there, and just reading over it, kind of shares multiple kind of ownership kind of models of property from the deed restrictions, limited equity, community land trust kind of speaks just a bit about different approaches and ways in that. And so I wasn't sure. Well, actually, I do not know that came actually. A community member emailed Marla that piece there around the thoughts there. So, is there any just on this shared model piece of thoughts that folks want to bring up?
Yeah. I looked at it briefly, and I don't know. I don't know enough about and I didn't take the time honestly to try to delve into it or do any research, but don't know enough about, I'd heard of those models, obviously the community land trust and the other things but I didn't know what, if that was to guide us or prompt us to take more of a definitive stance on if there is a model or several models that we wanted to think about as we go through our work. I wasn't quite sure, or if it was just for information.
Yeah, I think it may have been more information because I was copied on the same email. One of the community members emailed Marla and copied me on that as well, just talking about something that came across about, that the city should be considering and thought the committee should review. And I think that's even something to think about committees and the small groups, and we'll go back to those. I think this falls under, even conversation around just more evaluation around the methodology around that being included in the conversation of an overarching housing plan, because I think there's room for those styles to exist in different ways. So I think that's a good place for that to be reviewed a little more in depth. Cool. All right. Moving down here to just future meetings. Note that Marla did forward over just information around the meeting formats and the return to in-person on partial things, and then the necessity, as I understand it, that if virtual meetings are to continue, then there's action I know the council has to take in order to change some of the provisions in terms of meeting schedule pieces there. And as I've been reading the information, there is something that was moving forward to allow for that, but that has not happened. And if the local state of emergency order is rescinded, then that impacts our meeting and in-person component. So I do want to lay out there and just throw out, not sure if Melanie, if you want to add anything to that conversation before we get some perspective from the group on our preference. Melanie.
Yes. Even if whatever decision you need to make we do have to, you all have to come in person to vote on how you plan to meet moving forward. So your next meeting, you have to have a in-person meeting to decide how you're going to meet moving forward. So the next meeting, you have to plan to come into the office to have that next meeting.
I said, why government so complicated, Melon?
It's like a bad movie.
I'm going to mute and turn off my camera on that one.
So Melon, what you're saying is, even if we want to continue to have, I mean, maybe there are, like a lot of organizations as well as churches are having the same discussion of doing the dual access. People that want to come in can come in, but if you still want to participate virtually, that option is there. You're saying we have to actually meet in person to make that decision.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I understood. But that is what the email said. I mean, it did say, I don't, but I wasn't sure about that.
Oh man.
That's funny.
It is funny. I will just throw out my 2 cents, which is I have loved getting back together in person for in-person meetings. There is something different about them, and there's a certain level of interaction you get. But I also love the fact that every meeting I'm in that is a virtual component has a higher participation rate, because if somebody's on the road and they can log in, that's great. Right. I would rather them be there virtually than not. So when we get together to vote, I'll be voting for a hybrid model at a minimum.
You just took the words out of my mouth, John.
Yep.
Yeah, I love the flexibility too.
Yeah, I agree. I just think, the way things are and moving forward, I tell folks, there's some things that are here to stay and some things that, that you want to go back to, but then at the end of the day, there's some middle ground that we have to find in that space. And so, yeah, I think the high value in the in-person piece, but, keeping a lifeline for folks to be able to stay engaged, because you rather folks, not have to try to guesstimate through minutes, minutes do a decent job of tell you what you talk about. But, if you're in it directly, there's still that opportunity there. Other thoughts? All right. So, what's that? Let me move to that date. That's date's already set for.
Yeah, it's April 22nd. April 22nd.
Okay, so April 22nd.
And so will we know the meeting room? I guess Marla will send that out with the meeting notice. Do we know where to show up at? Which facility?
Yes, it will be our 4th floor conference room, more than likely, but Marla we will send that out.
Okay.
All right. So got to have some buffers on when we get there. Okay. All right. And then last things here, we have updates. And this is one I do want to kind of frame in this one. Maybe we can, when Marla gets back in terms of getting some framing on things. So notice it's like current projects, and that's one area that we've asked turns around, getting information and thoughts on different projects that may be moving through in that around housing pieces. And one of the additional conversations that did have with the mayor and even the chair of the housing coalition that I talked about, the Housing and General Government Committee, Chair Adams, was ways that our voice, as we look at one of the particular items of our charter around advising the council on these projects and things as they come forward, figuring out a model that works for those recommendations to come forward to the council. And in the conversation with the mayor, he threw out, maybe it's similar to the planning board, when they get they just get something, the council gets a recommendation from, a formal recommendation document from the planning board on zonings and that kind of stuff. So maybe it looks something like that, our recommendation on a particular project or as it comes forward. But I think being able to define what that process looks like to vet something that comes through, hearing information about it, and then, weighing in to the council through the committee space on the projects that come through. I think that's something we'll need to tease out what that process looks like, and making sure that there's sufficient timing in our meetings to be able to review and hear whatever information that comes forward on a particular project. And so I'm happy to work offline with you, Melon and Marla, to kind of figure out, what works best in that process in our meeting. And I'm sure you all probably have a better sense of what that looks like, taking it to the council from a recommendation standpoint for us. But did just want to throw that out as we will get into that current project update. Okay. Did you have any new or current projects that are moving, Marla, to brief us on or share?
No, as she indicated, we are moving forward with our, comp plan, our home application, which consists of our home funds. HUD has not released our allocations for CDBG home, COC. We're looking for those numbers to come out, hopefully next month. They're usually out by now, but the allocation hasn't been released. All applications from the city agencies have been reviewed or are being reviewed by the CAC, which is the Citizens Participations and Organizations. Applications have been reviewed. We have completed the home ARP funds application plan, which will be approved by council this month. Those additional funds that coming through the city is $4,887,567. And that application will be going into HUD next month. And
that's for home funds?
Those are home ARP funds. And that consists of special funding for, let's see. Supportive services, acquisition and development of non-congregate shelters, tenant-based rental assistance, development of affordable rental housing, nonprofit or operational funds, nonprofit capacity building type activities. So that those type funds, that's how those funds will be used. That plan will be going in to HUD.
And this is my on
That's,
the home
that's
and
that's home ARP funds. That's additional to the other funding that we will be that our entitlement funds.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, I know you said they hadn't approved the number yet on the home CDBG dollars for the city for this round. I know I've seen in some other places where they've seen a pretty decent increase on that, because I think maybe in the last budget they did have some increases in areas on that. Is there any sense yet in terms of percent increase that communities are seeing around those allocations?
We don't know yet. We anticipate CDBG, we anticipate home to have an increase. There's usually a small drop of CDBG allocation, because each year the entitlements get like 5 or 6 more cities added because of the formula. So you see a drop in CDBG allocations.
Yeah, got it. And for the sake of the coalition, just for folks to understand the pieces who may not understand, just on the home funds, home dollars, both pots of these monies are federal dollars, and then the home funds are specifically targeted to around low income housing, and it can be utilized both on the rental side as well as the home ownership side in terms of the type of ways that those dollars can be used. But it's specific to targets low income households. CDBG, I think it even has a mark there in terms of rehab and infrastructure only. I will say that there also there is some I think capacity build piece that sometimes in the CDBG dollars that get used, but all these areas are all those federal pieces that the city gets annual allocations on, and those pieces are distributed then around. And this is one area for us around the financial recommendations that's in our charter for us to review. I think in our planning process, I think it will be helpful to even look at the historic way that the city uses its home and CDBG dollars, and even the comparison to what does that look like in other communities, because dollars that are targeted towards housing or have a housing use that's tied into it, I think it'd be interesting to assess, does the city actually use this, or do we use it for one of the other ways that it can be used? And if it's housing tailored, is there a way for us to start pivoting closer to using it in that housing arena? I think that's be an interesting question to understand.
So that's it for housing update.
Cool. All right. Other folks have thoughts, response there?
Oh, not on that. I had another question I wanted to ask before we adjourn. That's all.
I think it's appropriate.
Oh, I was just going to ask Mel, and I don't know who else was at the housing, workshop a month or so ago, or whatever. But when we were talking about organizations a few minutes ago, and Paul is interested in new organizations, was there anyone that appeared at that housing workshop that the city put on a month or a month and a half ago, how long ago it was? Any new organizations that we maybe didn't hear about, didn't know about, that either participated or made any presentations, or that had any questions that that we ought to know about? I was just curious. Speaking of new organizations within the city, and maybe there weren't. I was just curious if there were any that showed up or that had an interest in the work that was going on.
I don't recall.
Okay.
I would say no, in the way that it was actually done, it was kind of pretty structured in terms of the groups that came in, and there wasn't like a community kind of piece in there where folks were just talking to the council. It was a lot more nuts and bolts on housing and housing affordability programs. How do these things work? What's the defining terms and understanding impact of the decisions that the council makes and how that has rippling impacts through housing and stuff like that. So that was kind of a lot more of that central kind of dialogue they had.
All right. I wasn't able to tune in, so I wasn't sure how that was structured. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For that committee of the whole meeting that the council had, where they had the presentations from the school government, and especially the school government's presentation, there was a lot of really interesting data in there. Is it possible to get a copy of their presentation?
Melon, do you know if that's online?
I think it may be.
Is it online? I haven't had a chance to look.
It should be, because it was recorded.
Yeah.
And speaking of the data, John, Darren, what I heard is that data was a little outdated. Will there be new data coming in soon, and how soon?
I don't know if I don't think I can speak with Mel, but I will say that I think everybody's data at this point is probably outdated due to COVID. And I think that's probably a question of resources, even around on multiple things of, is that an area that we need to ask for, or is there a group of people who are working to update some of the data points that are out there? Because even some of the stuff that we're working from, even from a coalition standpoint, is probably about 3 or 4 years old in terms of some of the specific numbers and metrics. So I think you're right, Paula. I guess the question is I'm not sure if there's anyone right now who has that task or is directly working on updating the data, or if that would be a part of information we would want in the scope of work with whomever we end up contracting and doing something, if that's something we're asking them to do.
And I'm even hearing that the census data is not valid. Have you heard that?
That is absolutely true.
So do you think that we then might be doing another census, 2021? 2020.
That's not
won't happen. So. That won't happen.
That
Well,
won't
I'm
happen.
just hearing there's a lot of people that weren't counted.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. That's because I think there's a national number. They have the number to show in terms of what they even perceive to be an undercount. But at the end of the day, they end up having to go off of, the actual, data that's there, even if they know that, some of those are not as accurate. So I doubt it. That I'd win the lottery before that happened.
Yeah. But the census is a challenge. I mean, seriously, the census is a challenging operation no matter when it's done, but trying to pull that off during a pandemic, there were going to be issues any which way you look at it. So yeah, I think this is going to be the grain of salt census for the remainder of time.
Yeah. And I think that's why I think for us, even as we look at, and, the conversations, even if it's with Andronika and those folks, or if it's someone else, I think we do need to have some component on what we ask for, as there needs to be a data component to that, to at least on our local level, to see how we can help understand the numbers we're working from and what has shifted and changed in that environment since we started. And there's a lot that shifted, but I think that's key. If we can just make that note to that we should probably include some data, some kind of request to that.
Yeah, because Darren, it seems that if the secondary data is not going to be accurate, then that seems to be a call for more primary data.
Right, because Paula, even when we here in housing, when we look at, when they talk about the number of houses that are being built, and you go back and you look at each year, you always go down to permitting and look at, how many permits have been issued in the city and in the county, and you add those numbers and say, okay, how much has been built during this period of time, so you start looking at that and you do an average, and you add that to the old of last year, and then, look at the new permits and new housing and all that information, and you continue to add up so you can get sort of an accurate count of what is out there that, now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I don't know if I just found this interesting. We had a presentation for our membership last week from the realtor side, and the inventory that's out there is so low. I mean, it is scary. And we're talking across this housing spectrum.
Yes.
We're at roughly 18 days of inventory right now. 17, 18 days of inventory in housing, not affordable housing, in housing. And the market rate apartment occupancy rate average across the Triad right now is 97.5%. So it's effectively full. Yeah. It's stunning.
That is scary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's where, I know, maybe to back to conversation, that's one of the things that I've just been tossed around. That's why I wonder, even when you look at prioritization of work and just of alleviation of some of those pressure, how much some of the rehab, the being able to, what moves the quickest, and is in prioritizing opportunities around rehab. We're just trying to get more units on back open and available to folks, as well as when you look at what you're building and constructing. And that's just been a thought I've been just thinking around, just, on the rehab side, you may have a property that, needs some TLC and some work, and it can be, right back out and ready and available, as opposed to a longer time frame if you're going to be building something out the ground. And how do we work those different tracks simultaneously? So
yeah. The reason I wanted to get that school of government presentation is one of the most interesting things that they put up to me was the available housing at certain AMI, and the fact that there's actually, if you look at the people who are in an AMI category and the amount of housing that's supposed to be available to them, actually, it should be adequate, but because the higher AMI categories are under, there's not enough for them. They are renting or purchasing at the lower AMI. So it's taking the inventory out of that AMI away from the people who only qualify for that level of rent or can only afford that level of rent. So it's that housing as an ecosystem idea, where if you don't have enough at the higher AMI, it's going to automatically push people into the lower AMI and take that inventory away from those folks.
Right. And John, that's what I was talking about when I talked about the segments, when we were talking about, biting it all off at one time. I mean, the segmentation of this process, it's a significant dynamic in order to try to alleviate the most critical needs for housing, if you would. Yeah.
It is. That's why the day in and day out, one of the things I'm really, really worried about is just the sheer lack of inventory that's been developing across the spectrum over the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if we have any data points, but I know that there's anecdotally we can pull on many of them. And this is one of the things I used to share a lot, is, we, with some of our newer developments that have come up or that or have been in works, many of those things, particularly in the inner city, the multifamily ones, they have they kind of been replacing older the housing that had been at a lower rate, and then you're coming in and they have a much higher rate. And with some of those, even density is not as dense as some other developments. So you're not even replacing 1-to-1 in terms of what you come back up, and so you still end up with a net loss of units, even though you've created some new ones, but the net return is not that you've developed more units in the community.
Yeah, we are most definitely in the and not or territory. We need it all. I don't care what you build, we need it all. And I did a little just real cursory research and looked at building permits over the last 20 years in Alamance, Guilford, and Forsyth counties. And if you go back to like year 2005 or so, there were roughly 5,500. This is for single family. There were roughly 6,500 or 5,500-ish building permits. And don't take that number to the bank. It's rough. And this all came from Federal Reserve. And then you look at after the recession, that plummeted to under 500 in some cases, some years. And then we are only back to roughly 3,000 per year right now, or at least in the last year I could find. So we haven't gotten back to the construction rate of pre-recession, and our population has grown steadily over those 20 years. So you have fewer housing units being built, more people moving here, and you end up with a shortage. And that's been year over year. So it's not like it happened overnight. It's been developing for 15-ish years. And it's, we're not going to build our way out of it overnight either. I mean, it takes a long time and a lot of money to build a housing unit right now.
Yeah. All right.
And on that note, sorry to be a bummer.
All righty.
Yeah, I said, John, I'm a pastor. I like to leave people with hope.
That's why you don't want me up front. That's why you put me in the back. Put me in the, what do they call it, the Baptist pew in the far back. That's
yeah. No, but it's it's sobering, and that's the thing I think folks need to understand and to know. And I think even to the community component, Paula, that I think a lot of folks they look at it and say, folks do something, or we need to do something. We do, and things are moving, but we didn't get here in overnight, and we certainly won't be able to get out of the hole at the same time. But we do have to get our hands and arms around it, and so I think we are moving progressively in the right direction in this process. So
That's true, Darren. It's just hard for people who are in need right now to.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah, because they don't care. They don't care how long, you know.
Right.
Fix it. It's needed. Yeah.
Right.
That's the hard part. I mean, there are people who need it now. Yeah.
Yeah, they need it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. With that, that concludes the agenda there. And if there are other items, other thoughts folks want to share with the group before we adjourn for our next in-person meeting.
All right.
See y'all next time.
See ya.
All right.
Ready to vote.
Appreciate it. All right. Take care. Thanks, Melon. Thanks.
Thanks.